All right, here we go. This is Pass the Hash 2, Admin's Revenge. I'm Chris. This is Skip. Who was at our talk at DerbyCon last year? All right, quite a few people. Just a quick show of hands. Who's a Windows admin? Nice. Pen tester, incident responder, other security. All right, so we've got a lot of security people. Again, this is Skip, and I'm Chris. So last year we released a bunch of tools known as the Pass the Hash suite. Those tools are mostly in Kali with the exception of one or two. The rest are still in Backtrack. Who's used those tools? Pen testers? Anyone use Pass the Hash Firefox? Cool. So basically what we were saying is you don't have to just pass the hash to SMB. You can pass the hash to lots of other things like Exchange, MS SQL. You can pass the hash with Pass the Hash Firefox to SharePoint, to OWA. And my personal favorite, you can pass the hash over WMI and not have to use things like PSExec.
So we're pretty much here because we want to talk about some of the stuff that's been going around with Pass the Hash. We want to provide some practical details and practical things that anyone can do to prevent against credential attacks as well as Pass the Hash, and do it all in less than 80 pages. So the real issue is that Pass the Hash sounds really sexy, but it's not really the problem. It's by design functionality. So Windows has lots of problems with authentication. You've got credential exposure in memory, you've got broken protocols, cached credentials, tokens, and the list just goes on and on. So Pass the Hash is, like I said, it's not even really a big problem if you can get system on the box and just go read the damn password out of memory. I mean, really, who cares about Pass the Hash if I actually have the username and password? This is a fun one. People seem to think that you can patch by design functionality with a patch, and you can't do it. It's the way NTLM operates. It's the way NTLM will always operate. It's the way NTLM has always operated. Why do you think that the NTLM security service provider in Windows only stores the hash if that wasn't the only thing it needed to use? So this is a slide that was ripped off from the Black Hat presentation from Microsoft. A couple of remarkable things about this. First off, they actually quoted an outside security source, Benjamin Delpy, the guy who wrote Mimikatz, so they deserve a round of applause for that. Come on. They admit that there's people outside of Microsoft that actually look at this shit. Acceptance. So the most interesting thing here is you can see kind of where we are along the top row here. The red means that password data is in memory. The green means that password data is not in memory. So you have across the top where we're at, Microsoft local account, domain account. Right now you see it's mostly red. In theory, in the most soon-to-be released version of Windows, 8.1 and 12R2, most of those red boxes are turning green, and they're finally getting rid of LM in memory. I think they also deserve a round of applause for that. Because why not enforce a strict password policy, you know, if you can just get the frickin' LM password out of memory. But anyway, the one problem is, and I think this is where everything's going to get pushed, you see this column where it says third-party SSP. So even though they're fixing the SSP behavior for their own stuff, all you have to do is load a third-party SSP, which coincidentally there's one in the SDK that you can get for Windows in all versions, that, you know, I think all you have to do is just compile it, install it. So if you're already at system, you just install a dummy SSP and you can just read it anyway. So it doesn't really solve the problem, it just, you know, moves the problem a little bit over to the left so it's no longer Microsoft's problem. Somebody else's. And even if Microsoft figures out a way to completely neutralize Pass the Hash, remember, there's no guarantee they're going to backport it into what you're actually using. So just as a quick survey, Who here still has Windows 2000 somewhere on their network? Does anybody have anything older than Windows 2000 on the network? Okay. How about 98? 95? Ooh. Windows for work groups. Wow. Windows 3.1. Or you stop at work groups. It's too warm. Wow. That takes me back. So, you know, they're bringing out this new functionality for Windows 8.1. They'll backport it to, I think they're going to backport it to Windows 7, but if you're not on Windows 7, most of this new functionality is not going to exist. And furthermore, anything that happens on the DC side, you're going to have all your domain controllers in Windows Server 20,002 or 2012, pardon me, R2 running at probably 22 or 2012 R2, the highest domain functional level in order to get any of the functionality to work right. So really outside of a lab environment, a lot of their fixes aren't really going to be terribly practical. Kerberos doesn't actually solve the problem either. The NTLM hashes are used as the long-term secret keys between Kerberos principals. And the Kerb TGT hash is the master key for every ticket in Kerberos for the server side. So even though there's not any public tools available that take advantage of this, if it came to a point where this was the only viable way to attack Kerberos, there would be publicly available tools that did it, because it's just the way it's designed. And, you know, TGTs are also portable, so you can actually dump TGTs with WCE and then port them on another machine, and it's the same problem. It's just like passing the hash, only it's passing the ticket. Big issue is single sign-on. You have to ask the user only once for their password, because if you ask them more than once, you know, they get tired of typing or something. I don't know. And you also have to cache credentials for every form of authentication that Microsoft supports, because, you know, who wouldn't want you to log into, you know, your super secure domain with Xbox Live? So Microsoft has a credential problem. Obviously, we already touched on this, but Mimikatz, multiple SSPs save the username and password in addition to hash. So, you know, we talked about that chart. Even if nobody's logged in, there's at least one plain text password for a domain account in the LSA secrets, and that's the computer account. Computer accounts are kind of fun because nobody thinks that everyone knows they're there, but nobody thinks that anyone uses them for anything. But that's actually what the computer system account uses to query the domain. It's what the computer's system account uses to interact with stuff. So using that username and hash, you can enumerate users on the domain. You can do lots of things. You can open up shares that are available to any user. You can have a lot of fun with that, and nobody ever looks for it. And in all likelihood, there's probably going to be more stuff out there. There's going to be saved passwords for service accounts and stuff like that, and that's also in the LSA secrets. You have the local account hashes and the SAM. The 500 account is dangerous. It actually has separate UAC settings that are disabled by default, because on Vista Plus, the 500 account itself is disabled by default. When you create a new instance of Vista Plus, you actually create a regular user that's in the domain admins group, so it falls under the by default UAC settings. But in this day and age, any large enterprise usually images computers, and they usually go back and re-enable the 500 account without re-enabling the UAC for the local 500 account, which makes it very dangerous. And on Server 2012, for example, it's enabled because that's how you manage the box. So with the UAC disabled, you have to be aware that that account is out there and could be the bane of your existence if you're a defender. And just because there's not enough time in the day, we're not going to talk about domain cached credentials, token impersonation, services that store passwords and files, plain text passwords and file data, on the file server somewhere, keyloggers, phishing, or any of the other ways that attackers can get usernames and passwords. Bottom line is, an attacker has multiple ways to gain access to valid or usable network credentials. Attackers always take the path of least resistance. And once an attacker has system on a box, it's usually a matter of time until they have system on your domain controller. Just the way it is.
All right, I didn't say this earlier, but thanks for coming out at 9 a.m. I know it's rough for everybody. So we've got this pass the hash problem. Microsoft has had it for years. Other products have it as well. They're not the only ones. But how did Microsoft go about making this problem actually worse in the last few years? Well, they did it by ensuring that every local admin has the same password and giving you an easy way of accomplishing that with group policy preferences. And they made sure some accounts and some enterprises aren't changing their passwords, therefore changing their hashes. So once you get the hashes once, you have them forever. So let's start with group policy preference settings. Who uses these or has heard of them? A couple people. Who uses them to set passwords on boxes? A couple people. Okay, so it's really easy. In this screenshot, we're renaming the administrator account to Don't Hash Me Bro and setting a password. So now when each box checks in to get their refresh, a group policy, their local admin account will then be changed to that password in that account. And that's great because the admins know everywhere what the username and password is. And if you've given local administrator rights to any of your users, this pretty much prevents them from locking you out of those boxes. So it's actually very popular. Unfortunately, by concept, it's making this whole process for an attacker easier by setting the same password, i.e. the same hash, on every single box. So now you get one local admin and you can move to any other box looking for elevated credentials. But it's much worse than that. So an Italian researcher, I think it was a team, released a Python tool to go decrypt the actual group policy object and give you the plain text password back. That tool is no longer available, but we'll get to that in a second. It is AES encrypted, but it's encrypted with the same key on every enterprise. And that key, in the screenshot on the bottom, was on MSDN. So you could just go get the key.
Well, for reference purposes.
Right. To be fair, they no longer claim that this is a good feature to use or a security feature at all. But they did at first, and they did recommend it. All right, so we're going to do a quick demo that we recorded. The local admin passwords being enforced with group policy preferences. A limited domain user is going to try to do something with elevated rights. They're going to run a script that I wrote, get GPP password, which is basically a port from that Python script, which is available in PowerSploit. And that user is now going to be a local admin and could then potentially use that on other boxes. So at the bottom, that's on my GitHub, get decrypted C password, is basically the straight port of that Python tool where you would just pull down the C password from the actual object and then decrypt it. All right, so we've got a low privilege domain user, normal.user. It's going to go ahead and try to log into the demo domain. And, they're an authorized user, so they can log in. All right, so now they've got this cool thing that they downloaded already that they love. They use it at home all the time. DNC. Anybody have that on their network? That's unfortunate. So this user is going to go ahead and try to install VNC, and thankfully he doesn't have admin rights because users shouldn't, unless they work at Microsoft apparently. So the problem with group policy preferences, this user is literally seconds away from being a local admin. And anyone that's deployed group policy preferences on their network, all of your users are seconds from being local admin. So they're going to go, the seconds are, open the browser, go to GitHub, grab get GPP password, which we updated to do cool things like find the domain controller for you, go find these objects on the domain controller, parse them out, and give you a nice little report at the end. So the user's going to open PowerShell and just paste that function into the PowerShell console. Still, I ran whoami, so you can see, still a normal user. So regardless of what your execution policy is, this is going to work because execution policy doesn't stop anything at the console. So now we're going to run get GPP password. And that's it. No parameters, no switches. And it goes to the domain controller, pulls down the password. Recycling ×3 for the win. Creative. Thank you. And then, well, thank you, Microsoft. And then all they got to do is type that password in. And if they're more nefarious, they'll proceed to move to other boxes or use PowerShell to install Meterpreter on every single box that that password works on. But just so you see that it works. And bam, they can now install VNC. So I put this demo up on YouTube. So if you want to grab that and show your admins, if you're a security person, show them why they should not be doing this without running get GPP password and like getting the local admin password and getting in trouble. You can do that. Alright, so what it looks like is at the bottom you see this string that looks like it's base64. It is base64, but it's also encrypted. So you can also use get decrypted cpassword if you just want to pull the specific strings out. So that's group policy preferences. That's terrible. So let's talk about smart cards. Everyone loves smart cards. We've got to deploy smart cards. I was an enterprise admin years ago, and organization came to us, Microsoft, and said, hey, we want to do smart cards. And they extolled all the value of security in smart cards, so we bought it hook, line, and sinker. And we deployed it, still deployed. And then later I became a pen tester of that same environment, and I realized how bad it was. So, you don't need a password with the smart card, right? You check the box, smart cards required for interactive login. You get your smart card and your PIN, and now they have these awesome things, virtual smart cards. You don't even have to carry something around. It's already there. But unfortunately, Microsoft did not change how authentication works on the back end. It's still exactly the same. On the domain controller, in the ntds.dit, your NTLM hash, your NT hash and your LM hash are still there. It's still working exactly the same way. So the password's crazy long and not even ASCII, so that's what the bottom thing is. So once you've checked that box, you get this crazy long password. But unfortunately, when you dump the hashes, from an attacker's perspective, it's much easier to type the hash and use it with the pass the hash tools. To include pass the hash Firefox and logging into your NTLM SSP apps remotely with those hashes, even if all they have is smart cards. Does anyone have any questions on that? Does it make sense? Go ahead. Absolutely. It's fixed length. It doesn't matter. So if your entire enterprise is made up of smart card users, their hashes are still very valuable and can be used to do anything but interactively log on, which most attackers don't care about interactive logon. So what we're kind of pushing here, and the reason that Pass the Hash Firefox even exists, is Skip and I ran into scenarios like this in our previous job where we would dump the hashes and they would have active defenders, several of them are here in this room, that would be going and looking for our stuff. So instead of leaving anything, we left with the hashes, and when we wanted to come back and get something, we would just pass the hash with Firefox back to their OWA or SharePoint and look like a normal authentication, take what data that we needed and leave nothing behind. So that's the persistence reference in there. All right, so Microsoft gave some pretty solid mitigations that you'll find hopefully on any pen test report. Restrict and protect high privilege domain accounts. Good. Restrict and protect local accounts with admin privileges. They do, or they don't, but you should. Restrict inbound traffic using Windows Firewall, because everyone loves having thousands of non-centrally managed firewalls on their networks. But the bottom line, when Skip and I read it, is they were just telling you to chill out with Pass the Hash and just keep calm and eat your vegetables, do what you're supposed to do on the network, and you'll be fine. Which isn't really the case. So we're not giving you much more than that, in that we're saying don't get owned. But that's the real mitigation, is don't let your hashes out of your network. Because what we're not talking about the pretty typical Pass the Hash attack, where an attacker gets on a local box, dumps the hashes, and then moves laterally with them. What we're talking about is they've owned your enterprise, taken all your hashes, and you're not owned, in my opinion, forever. Until you rebuild your entire enterprise, they can continue to come back in, and it's going to be nearly impossible to detect them. So you got to keep them from getting in the first place. So tell your users they don't need admin rights. Do everything you can to prevent them from, and I know that's hard, but you got to do it. Set file permissions on things like PowerShell and cmd.exe, and patch all local privilege escalation bugs, not just the ones that are marked high, because they're very easy to go from those to owning your enterprise. Use UAC. I know it's just a stumbling block, but it is a pain in the butt. So most pen testers are going to say UAC is worthless, but in my opinion, it's not. Currently, to bypass UAC, you have to drop a DLL to the disk. You don't otherwise have to do that. So later on today at 6, Matt Graver and I will be giving a talk about not writing to disk for a whole hour. UAC is one of those things that will force you to write to disk in order to bypass. So use it. Don't use GPP, period, ever, for any reason that has a password in it. Anything you do there can easily be seen by any user or machine account on the domain. Just get rid of the 500 account and all its UAC bypassing funniness. Don't use credentials in startup scripts or any other script in plain text. And don't save service account passwords on the workstations themselves. So last year we talked about protecting the crown jewels, that your data is what you're protecting. It's not your network. It's not your enterprise. Who cares about your domain controller? It's whatever makes your business money you should be protecting. But the DC is where all that control is. So if you lose that, you're probably going to lose your data. So another thing that we come across very regularly is VMs. Either you've got a backup domain controller on a virtual machine and you back that up, and we've seen that stuck out on consumer backup devices where we've just got on the network and downloaded an actual domain controller.
Makes it easy.
Yep. So
We're helping with the cloud storage. That's
right. So don't do that. Encrypt your backups. Treat them as if they're live. And don't allow regular users to gain access to that stuff. All right, so this is a problem that's near and dear to my heart. As a previous enterprise admin, domain admin, I was a part of a group that was really good, and they were trying to limit this stuff. So I got kicked out of the domain admins group, and I was a little upset about that. I eventually worked my way back into it, but you probably don't need 50 enterprise admins. How many do you probably need? Does anyone know what Microsoft recommends? 1, 2, 3 at the most. Domain admins are the same. So you need to push privileges down, and that can't happen overnight. So the biggest problem is you got to teach your people that they can fix problems without just giving admin rights away. And again, this is eat your vegetable stuff. So a little story about when I was an enterprise admin. So I was in the military, and unfortunately, when I was in the military, when you're ordered to do something, you tend to do it. So I would have people that outranked me that came in and said, I will be a domain admin. Make my account. So I got smart, and I said, all they said is that they wanted to be a domain administrator. I will be a domain administrator. Okay, so I created a group called Domain Administrators, and I explicitly denied that group's ability to do anything on any domain controller. And then I added them to that group, so when they did net user on themselves, they were in the Domain Administrators group. And anytime they tried to do something that they weren't supposed to be doing anyway, they would have to come to someone in our shop and explain what they were doing, and they never felt comfortable enough to do that. And this worked for a really long time. So, that's great, except if you're in the military, you leave, right? And then sometimes you come back, and maybe you've got a little rank, and you come back, and they're still running the same game, and you come in to be put in the domain admins group. And they put you in the domain administrators group. Yep. So that happened. All right, so issue multiple accounts to admins. Is everyone doing this? Your domain admins have specific domain admin credentials. I don't know how many times I've seen on pen tests where domain admins are browsing with their domain admin credentials. And NTLM relaying and all the other vulnerabilities that we haven't discussed in this talk come into play. And that's just terrible. So you've got to really make sure that your privileged accounts are only being used when necessary. So monitor their use, and we'll talk about that in a second, and find out why they're actually being used. Manage tokens, and this is something that when we talk to Microsoft, they don't seem to agree with us as to the importance of tokens, but is everyone familiar with tokens? When you log in, a token's created in memory, and then you can impersonate that token. So if a domain admin is connecting to every single box, say as a vulnerability scanner, and checking for patches, then that token is now going to be on every single box. So if you have GPP and they've privilege escalated to admin, they now have a domain admin token that they can impersonate, and that's pretty much the flow of a lot of pen tests. So PSExec, McAfee, there are lots of third-party products, just picking on one there, but that actually leave administrative tokens on remote boxes. So don't leave RDP sessions up. That's another good way to leave a token around. And one of the hardest organizations I ever pen tested, they had this practice that I thought was absurd, where their admins would reboot, even their help desk admins. If they did anything on a box, they were rebooting the box. And it was all about token management. But I mean, it took us weeks to get to find someone who wasn't doing that, and that's ultimately how we got in. So rebooting will get rid of those tokens. You're not going to do that on domain controller, though. All right, so where's the admin's revenge, right? We're still talking about problems, so let's get to that. All right, so that smart card thing. This was my simple solution to the smart card problem. Obviously, there are better ways, and I hope Microsoft fixes that. But this is a PowerShell function, which relies on the Active Directory module, so it's got to be ran from a domain controller. And all of this stuff is up on GitHub. So all we're going to do is go through all the Active Directory users and find who's required to use a smart card. And then we are going to uncheck that box, wait 1 second, and then check it again. So every single one of those users are going to get a new pseudo-random password. hence they'll have a new NT hash as well. So now that password isn't there forever. So the intern who got their smart card 10 years ago or 8 years ago and is now the CEO, that problem no longer exists. All right, group policy preferences. So this set unique password will actually do, and there are lots of scripts like this. I took this all from talking to people about this problem. I didn't come up with any of these myself, but one of the things that Skip asked for was a random switch. So you set unique password random. You can pipe a list of computers to this. You can bend this to work in your enterprise. It's not going to work in everyone's enterprise out of the box, but you can do at the bottom, the bottom example. Can everybody see that? You can basically prepend things you can prepend a phrase or postpend, whatever that is, to the append to a unique thing on each box. So you can pull out, say if it's a Dell, it's got a Dell serial number or service tag number. That's going to be actually in the registry. You can pull that out. So this script will go through and take that. That's something you can see on the box. So your local admins walk up, they know the phrase. This unique thing makes the hash different. It kind of breaks the whole pass the hash because every hash on every single box is different. So if you want to set a password that you're going to know on each box, this is just a way to do it. I'm sure there are better ways, but there's lots of different things that I didn't use in the script that you can grab and get an idea for. All right, so let's follow the standard security practice of writing detection tools for all pen test tools, because that's a great idea, right? Because that's what attackers are actually using, are pen test tools, which is not at all the case. But you could try to write a script to find every single pass the hash tool. So in this case, I released 3 examples of that, and I've already let on that this is a terrible idea. So you can do find psexec, which will look for the signatures of psexec in your logs. So this is an after the fact, and I'll explain how you could use this live as well. But so then there's some signatures with the Microsoft psexec, and then winexec is a Linux tool that does pass the hash. So let's look at the find MSF psexec function, which is full of fail. Basically, we're going to look for something that has a set length before .exe and starts with a capital M. And a couple months ago, Rob Fuller saw this and was like, wow, that's terrible, so let's change that. So now you can change that within Metasploit to not do this. So if you wanted to quickly go through your logs, because everyone goes through their logs regularly, right? You could run this function through, and this is using the get event log, which is an older PowerShell commandlet. It's pretty slow, but the one I'll recommend using is a lot faster. So if you were to run this, because we're iterating over so much and basically iterating over each event log, if you ran this on a DC, it would take minutes at least to run through. So this is a better way to do it. This is get win event, which is a newer commandlet within PowerShell. And what we're looking for is actual NTLM, explicit NTLM logons, because you shouldn't see those. Kerberos is going to take over. You're going to see different logon events typically. So if you run this on your network, and this will run on I ran it on a 8 gig event log, and it returned within a few seconds. So this will actually move pretty quickly. So if you run this, you're going to run into a lot of anonymous logons if you've got like Linux stuff out on your network. So that's how you would filter that out at the top there. So the biggest thing we're advocating with this is to catch real incidents, not red teamers, not pen testers. It's great to catch them while you're going after real bad guys. But that's what it's going to come out looking like. Again, this is up on my GitHub. So Evil Insider with a random host name. And then you've got, Evil Insider with a random host name. Those are extremely suspicious, but even if they're not, these are things you can go track down, find out what's going on, learn your network a little better. And at the top, I mentioned send mail message. Is anyone familiar? Is anyone using PowerShell for defense? Okay, we got a couple people. Hopefully that by next year is everyone in the room. PowerShell is great. It gives you the ability to quickly prototype security tools. In this case, send mail message lets you easily send emails. So you can send things to your Verizon by sending it at vtext. So in one example, a buddy of mine set this up so it text messages him anytime he sees explicit NTLM logons on his network. So he's constantly being pen tested and he's constantly being attacked, so he gets pretty regular text messages. But you can use this to build your own, I don't want to say tripwire, but your own IDS of sorts for your enterprise, and it doesn't cost you anything. And there's lots of sample code out there, and I'd love to answer questions on that kind of stuff as well. So we rushed through because we were behind, but we'd like to thank a couple people, and we thank you guys for coming out, and we'd love to field your questions as well. Go ahead. Absolutely, that's exactly. So what he said, so it's captured for the video, is that the task scheduler has event triggers, and event triggers are awesome, and we're going to talk about that in post-exploitation sense later on today. So you can trigger certain events to run the PowerShell script as well, but the way that I envision this is set up event log subscriptions on one box, essentially set up a syslog box for Windows, and then have a PowerShell script constantly running, just constantly checking maybe every minute or so, go through the logs, go through just the new logs, and look for this type of stuff and fire it off. Right. Yeah, it's, so I'm ObscureSec. Should have put a last slide for that.
Yeah. Actually, it's on our this slide.
Yeah. So I'm ObscureSec on GitHub as well, and that stuff is all there in the PowerShell directory. Yes, sir. I have not. I've been out of the enterprise administration.
I've heard lots of. I've actually been caught before by someone who used Splunk religiously. That was kind of annoying, but no, he literally caught us in like probably a couple hours of us doing some very aggressive behavior on his network. Of course, we waited till the weekend when he was gone and went back in, and so, it is what it is. But I've heard good things about Splunk. I'm not sure about Logarithm. I think most of these products you can test them out and do all sorts of interesting things with them. I mean, people have been looking at logs for years and had lots of success finding stuff. So anything you can do to increase the fidelity of your detective capabilities is a good thing.
Okay, that's a great point. I should have brought that up. He asked, Mark asked, if you run that script or that function to uncheck that box and recheck it, smart card users who have already authenticated, their session will die. They will immediately no longer be authenticated. So you need to prepare them for that experience, and that is why Microsoft did not adopt that as a valid fix. Right.
You guys have that, right?
So if you've got people using their smart cards to log in interactively, they will immediately get a notice that that they are no longer logged in.
And actually, I was recently at an organization that has a very large smart card deployment, and what they chose to do is only refresh the hash on admin and server admin users, leaving the regular rank and file people alone, because they felt that the biggest risk was at the higher privileged users. Even the higher privileged users had their own smart cards for their higher privileged accounts. So they had made a regular habit of refreshing that once or twice a month to prevent the hashes from being used. So that might be something to look at as well.
Okay, so his question was, why did we recommend that that they do run as and use elevated credentials on a box that could potentially be owned by their lower privileged accounts? Really what we were trying to get at was separating the activities themselves. I don't advocate completely the hot box or jump box mentality, but I've seen that used very effectively against pen testers, but that is a security risk, that is a concern. You shouldn't be administering your enterprise from the same box that you are browsing your Facebook account from. Those two things should not happen. So that's an excellent point. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Okay, that's an excellent question as well. I kind of skipped over that and didn't mention it. His question was there any persistence to, say you created a group policy preference and you pushed out a password, and then you stopped using, you came to a talk or you Googled group policy preferences and you discovered this is bad, we should stop doing it. There is absolutely persistence. That object is still sitting on the domain controller, and in multiple cases I've come later, ran the tool, and seen where they used to set their passwords with this and left those objects out there. So if you're going to go back and clean that up, go delete those objects, because your old password might give some sort of indication what your current password is. Any other questions? Again, thanks for coming out at 9.